Hi, welcome back. Today's topic is one of the most exciting topics that I have been wanting to talk about for a while now. It's about antibody identification. I love this aspect of blood bank so much because I feel like I'm a detective trying to find the culprit that caused the positive reaction. I will go over a simple single antibody. Then in the next video, I will go over a single antibody, but a bit more complicated to build up the groundwork and not to overwhelm you. Without further ado, let us get into it. When do we perform antibody identification? We do it when the results of the antibody screen is positive. The reason is we need to know what caused the positive reactions and what kind of product is best for the patient if the patient needs to be transfused. Now, if you need to review how to perform antibody screen, you can find a link to it up here or down in the description box below. If we are going to talk about antibody identification, we need to know what the antigram is and what it looks like. Here are the antigrams for both the panel and the screen. An antigram is a sheet of paper with a table that shows the absence and the presence of red blood cells antigens for each of the donors. It is where we filled up the reactions and either rule in or rule out antibodies. The difference between screens and the panel is that the screen represents less number of donors. The screen usually consists of 3 donors, while the panels can have upward of 20, depending on the type and the manufacturer. The zeros mean the donors do not have those antigens present on the RBC. The positive means that the donor have those antigen present on their RBC. You will see why these symbols are important in a second. An antibody screen results for our patients today is 003. Step 1. Get the correct antigram. Making sure that you are using the correct antigram. Using the wrong antigram will lead to the wrong identification. Once you have verified that you have the right antigram, you then record your results as you are reading the reaction. Step 2. Highlight row or rows with negative reactions. This step may not be necessary once you become more familiar with it, but to start out, I would suggest you to highlight all the rows with negative reactions. So in this example, you will highlight the first and the second row because these are the ones that have negative reactions. Step 3. Cross out homozygous antigen. The rule here is you can only use homozygous cells to cross out. What do I mean by that? I will use the RH group as an example. If the donor is positive for both big E and little e, that means this donor is heterozygous for E antigen and cannot be used to rule out E antigen. There is a positive sign in big C and 0 which mean negative in the little c. This means that the donor is homozygous for big C and it can be used to cross out or rule out. The logic behind this is, even when the antigen is present, there is no reactions, so the positive reaction is not from this particular antigen. I use the word cross out and rule out interchangeably. Let's get back to our example today. The first antigen is D antigen. It shows a positive sign, which means that this donor has D antigen present on the RBC. There's no little d shows here, so that the presence of D is homozygous, which means you can use this donor to cross out. Keep in mind, this is a simple explanation. The antigen actually has a very complicated lifestyle. Moving on to the next antigen, C antigen. Is this donor expressing homozygous C or heterozygous C? There is a presence of big C, which indicates as positive symbol. The little c is absent because it is indicated as 0. This means that this donor is homozygous for big C antigen and can be used to rule out big C as a possible antibody presence in the patient plasma. Moving on to the next antigen, E antigen. Is this donor expressing homozygous E or heterozygous E? There is an absence of big E antigen, which indicate as 0. there is a presence of little e, which indicate with positive symbol. This means the donor is homozygous for little e. Since this is a homozygous cell, we can use this to rule out little e as possible antibody presence in the patient plasma. The next antigen is CW. Can we rule in or rule out CW? The answer is no. The absence of CW in negative reactions is not a proof that CW is not the cause of the reaction. Using the same logic trying to cross out the rest of the antigen, once you finish with donor number 1, moving on to donor number 2, and repeat the same steps for crossing out. Step 4. Double check and cross out antigen at the top. We cross out each of the antigen in its own row and column in the previous step. Now, we will double check and cross it out at the top where the antigen is shown. If there is more than one cross out per antigen, we will indicate with X. If there's only one, then indicate that with one line across. Now that you have finished looking at the antibody screen, notice the antibodies that you have not crossed out, set that aside, and moving on to the next step. We will come back to those later. Step 5. Perform antibody identification using panel cells. After you perform the test according to the procedures, here are your results. Looking at the antigrams, do you know what to do? Exactly. It is the same as when we were looking at the antibody screen. Do not get discouraged by the number of positive cells. Just start with step 1, which I had done for you already. Let's go to the next step together. Step 2. Highlights all the cells with negative reactions. Step 3. Cross out homozygous cells. Step 4. Double check and cross out the antigen at the top. Now that you do all the crossing out, can you see what the possible antibodies that your patient has? You are left with CW, KPA, JSA, Big E, and Ruderin A. I know I told you earlier that the absence of antigens cannot be used to root out. However, that is in the perfect world and in the textbook. In real life, sometimes there are no cells available that we can use to cross out, so we rely on our experience and use educational guess. Okay, now that we have done the panel cells, we have more information and the pattern to look at. We can now do some educational guess. Both the KPA and JSA are negative for all the cells in the screen and the panel, and that do not seem to influence the reactions. So I would say we can rule out KPA and JSA. For CW and Lutheran A, there is a cell with CW and Lutheran antigens present that is positive. We need to do selective cell panel to rule out CW and Lutheran A. However, that is getting to be a bit more complicated than what I want to cover today. So let's just say I did a selective cell panel behind your back and I did rule out CW and Lutheran A. Now, we will be left with S antigen. This means the patient has antibody S in the plasma. If you take a look at the big S pattern, you will see that it matched the reaction perfectly. Wherever there are S antigen present, there are positive reactions. Be very cautious and keep in mind that it is not always this way. When there are multiple antibodies and or antibody that show doses, the patterns may not match exactly. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good introduction to antibody identification with this example. If you think this is helpful, please help me by like, share, and type Go Blood Bank in the comment. And happy learning. See you in the next video. Bye.